you can tell, my background's a little bit different, and I got a new microphone, so now I don't have to awkwardly sit here with a mic in my face. I'm also hoping there'll be a little bit less jump cuts because the other mic picked up every single breath I took, and it made me feel a little self-conscious, so I'm really excited about this new setup. Today I'm going to be talking about second drafts. I actually finished my first draft. I have a nice printed version of it, and I read it through cover to cover once, and then I added my notes on the back in blue, and then I went back again and I started doing very detailed edits, and you can see like a bunch of red marks. And the second time with the detailed edits, I only got about halfway through until I realized this is complete garbage, almost irredeemable garbage. So today I'm going to talk about the second draft and how to go about the editing process. And then if you want to stick around, I'll read some really beautiful prose from my first draft. The second draft is typically for developmental edits. So this is things like plot holes, character development, and other big picture edits. Something that I did do with my first draft is keep notes every time I wrote a scene or a chapter, and I would write down different things that I wanted to change, things that I needed to research, or just things I wanted to keep in mind for my next draft. And to be honest, I used none of that when I was starting to do the edits for this. And honestly, after I have done a little bit of the editing and kind of understand what it means now, I think that it might be kind of a waste of time to do, especially when you are writing your first draft. I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion. If you disagree with me, that's completely okay. I genuinely believe now that this first draft is literally just writing for me and getting to know the story. And to be honest, this is some of the worst writing I have ever read in my life. And that's okay. And I think that even speaks a lot to how much I've grown as a writer, that I'm able to read this and identify things that are problematic. Like, for instance, I use a lot of repetitive language. I have a lot of the same sentence structures over and over and over and over again, which is very boring to read. I also have very interesting decisions with my sentences, which I'll give you examples later. Something that really helped me be able to see the issues in my writing, outside of course the writer's books I'm starting to read and honing in on the craft, is giving myself space from the actual first draft. I believe I took about 3 months between when I finished writing it to when I started to edit it. And I feel like I've had so much growth in that time, and I'm really able to identify a lot of things in a more objective lens, because when I read this, I pretend I'm the reader instead of trying to read for what I meant. I'm trying to make sure that when I'm reading what I wrote. And I think that cool down period, or that time between when you finish it and start editing it, is really important. At least it was for me. I know some people don't even take a cool down period. They'll finish their first draft and then they'll start editing it right away. But the cool down period can really be as long as you need. It could be a week, it could be 6 months, it could be 3 years, whatever you need to be able to objectively look at your writing. But if you're like me and you need some extra time to be able to differentiate what you wrote versus what you meant to write, then it might be better to take some extra time. For the second draft, you're going to want to create a timeline. Depending on how you wrote the book, like for instance, I type mine up on Google Docs. I know some people like to write it with pen and paper. Either way, if it is within your means, you'll want to have a physical copy of it, so you'll want to print it out and read the story from front to back without making any notes. If you're still having a hard time distancing yourself from your work, even if it's on a physical copy, then maybe putting it on an e-reader can be a good alternative, so that way you're engaging with the text in a different format than how you wrote it. After you are done reading it cover to cover with no notes, try not to take any notes. Afterwards, write down your impressions. So for instance, for me, I just wrote it right on the back, and I wrote what's good about it, I wrote what's bad about it, and just some things that I wanted to pay attention to in my next reread. So now we're going to reread it again, and we're going to make sure that we're taking notes and just double checking that our plot's cohesive, that our characters make sense, and just the very big picture things work. And as you're going through, that's when you're adding your notes, like there's a plot hole here, this doesn't make sense with the character, things like that. So something that I was planning to do is doing a retrospective outline where I basically take each chapter or each scene and write a sentence or two about them to know what's going on. That way I could put it in index cards and then be able to visually see every story point that happens. I'm not going to do that now, especially because I'm going to be just rewriting this whole story from scratch. But that is something that I think could be really helpful for somebody, especially if you pants through the story. So if you are using Scrivener, you can actually put your first draft into the program if you didn't write it in there initially. And then you can use the synopsis or like the note card summaries for each chapter. So you'll write like 2 or 3 sentences for each chapter, and then add revision notes into your document notes or the document notes section. So that's just an idea of how you can use that to keep track of all the things, because then in Scrivener it creates like a board for you based on the information that you add. So now that you read through it and you made your markups on there of things that you want to change or needs to be developed more, you're going to make 2 lists. The first list is of things that are underdeveloped or need more work. And the second thing is highlighting things that did work and, very important, why it's working. Now that you've gone through your first draft twice and you have your lists, you're going to either start on a blank page or you're going to start editing your paper directly. There is some debate on which path is the right path. I think ultimately it's subjective and it's up to you. Personally, I'm going to be starting on a brand new blank page, mainly because a lot of the elements of my story is going to change. So it'd be a lot more work for me to try to edit what I've already written. Whether you start on a blank page or you use your already created first draft, make sure that you're tracking all of the changes that you're making, especially if you ever want to revert to a previous version. And also make sure you're using comments or footnotes in your documents or on your physical paper if you're writing it physically. So that way you can reference them later, or also maybe an editor or a reader in the future. This is also the time for you to do the research. On one side, you're going to want to research the things in your story, like maybe if you are writing about the Civil War, you'll want to make sure you really understand that topic. But also on the other side, you'll want to research things like story structures and elements and things to make you a stronger writer. And then we're going to actually start making the edits, and you're going to want to start with the most simplest edits first. So the first thing is make sure your hair color is the same for the character. Make sure their descriptors don't change randomly. If they have brown eyes at the beginning of the story and now they have blue eyes without any reason within the narrative, then you'll want to make sure that that's updated. In that same vein, you'll also want to make sure that names are consistent, that locations are consistent, and that your timeline makes sense. Another thing that you really want to pay attention to is head hopping. So if you're writing from, one character's perspective, we shouldn't be seeing things from a different character's perspective in that same scene. Something that I'm kind of guilty of is having author tics, so things that I repetitively put into my first draft. So for instance, this could be like repetitive wording, it could be repetitive sentence structure, it can also be repetitive tics that the characters do. Like for instance, if somebody's anxious, maybe they're all sweaty for some reason, but maybe not every character would react that way to being nervous or anxious. So you'll want to remove words that lessen your impact. So this is words like, actually, finally, really, almost, just, little, only, few, and other words like that. It doesn't mean you have to get rid of it in every single spot in your first draft, but it is generally advised to get rid of those words. You'll also want to make sure that you're backing up your drafts. Something that I do is I'll actually email myself a copy of a PDF of my draft that day, and I'll date it for that day. I know some people will also back it up onto the cloud, or they'll back it up onto a hard drive, or sometimes both. So it's completely up to you which direction you decide to take, but that is something that's really advised to do, is consistently back up your work. And like I alluded to at the beginning of the video, your first draft being messy is completely okay. Your second draft still being messy and you still feel like you want to start over, that's completely okay too, and even probably speaks to your growth as a writer and things that you're starting to notice in your own writing that needs to be improved. And I think overall you should look at it as a positive thing. I've also read that your second draft is probably going to be even worse than your first draft, and that's a common feeling. I'm not sure if that'll be the case for me. I haven't written my second draft yet, but I'm very curious to compare how I feel now about my first draft to how I feel about my second draft once it's done. So I guess that leaves the question, how do you know your second draft is done? And the very vague answer is when all of the big important changes are done, so your plot's cohesive, your characters make sense, and you even maybe throw in some subplots. Thank you for sticking with me. I hope this setup is a little bit nicer and that the microphone works a little bit better. It does make me feel a lot more comfortable not having to hold a mic like this the whole time, and I hope that shows on the video as well. I'm really excited to read to you some of my beautiful prose if you want to hang out and listen to that. My first example, and it's really good, it's the sun is starting to loop around and point directly at me. And my note just says, what does this mean? Because what do you mean? How does the sun loop around to look at you? That makes no sense. That's not how the sun works. My next example, my cautious steps are extremely careful. You don't say. Your cautious steps are extremely careful. Very good. Very good. My next example says, the house was a fully wooden house. Floors, wall, and ceiling was this oak. And all I wrote is, you can do better than this. Yeah, but beautiful. But you could probably picture a cabin, fully wooden house, and then I go through, in case you don't know what makes up a house, I make sure you know, just in case. The last example I'll share with you, even though there's plenty more in here. And I have been experiencing some weird hallucinations with plants, ... I shake my head. Not really sure what I was going for. All my comment says is, what awful writing, because I have no clue what I was trying to share or what it's supposed to say about the character. I don't know, because the character doesn't do drugs. Yeah, so those are some of my examples. If it makes you feel any better, or if it doesn't, that's okay too. Thank you for sticking with me. I'm really excited to get back to making videos. And if you have any suggestions on the draft 2 process that I didn't really touch on, or if you disagree with anything I said, definitely leave it in the comments below. But next time I'll probably be back and doing a review of Write, Edit, Publish by Michael Totten, or Totten, I'm not sure how to pronounce the last name. So I'll see you then, and have a good one. Bye.